Alright, this time on Captain Chaos's Laboratory, we're doing a Mr. Christmas holiday around the carousel. I may have done one of these already, but I wanted to show you it has a lot of extra parts. You build the thing. It's rather large. I think one of the first ones I did was this or a very similar model. But I wanted to show you the paperwork and how all the extra parts that we're not going to pull out are here. So let's clear all this off. Oh, also it comes with the registration card with the serial number of the part and the piece, and then of course your roof fabric, may reform, because Mr. Christmas likes to use real fabric, which makes it look good, but in some cases it's stained. So there we go. All right, workbench. Here is the power supply. I have not turned it on. From diagnosing this over the internet, it sounds like it's a bad motor. We're going to find out. The power supply is 6 volts AC. And right there, 6 volts AC. Let's plug her in. It's in the off position. Click. Make sure the volume's down a little bit so we don't go deaf. Here we got lights, which might be hard with all the lights I have. You can see they turn off, but there's no motion. The motor sounds okay. I can hear it humming. I think it broke a belt. I could be wrong, but we're going to find out. Let's turn this thing back off. Unplug the power. This one has a really good power port. This thing is really tight. Like most all Mr. Christmas, you got to pop this thing off, the center. Yeah, there's no friction. I can hear the gears. Sometimes you have to heat these, sometimes you don't. I'm going to see if it'll just wobble out. It's not wobbling, so we're going to give it a little persuasion to see if it'll pop up. They're generally glued in, usually with a dab of hot glue. If you can, try and do it without using any heat, because if you apply the heat for just a little too long, you will discolor or catch this on fire, the fabric. So generally, if you just wobble it back and forth, it'll pop out, which is what it's doing right now. The reason I wanted to get the spudger is if you keep pushing on the top, you could break this plastic rubber plug. It's a type of plastic, but it's got some flex to it, so it's kind of like a rubbery plastic. And just work it out. Take your time, and we don't damage the carousel or the fabric. There we go. And you can see where the glue and the fabric met. You can see the colors. I'm going to set that out of the way. It's a number 2 Phillips, which I thought I had out. Apparently I do not. Now, generally this screw will stay inside the hole, but just to prevent any loss, I am going to remove it. Stick it in my little box of parts over there. And next step is you've got to remove the canopy, the inner part. It's held on with little fingers, generally underneath the lip here. So there's a finger behind this sign, this sign, this sign. So there's 4 fingers. And I'll show you. That's what you're looking for. can use a spudger or a small screwdriver. You might have to put pressure on both sides, meaning that you have to start prying up on the fabric canopy at the same time that you're moving the fingers. It's not broke, it's just slipping. Before I do anything, I've just noticed that the fabric and these this plastic fascia, they're stuck together. Probably the fabric glue bleeding through if it got warm. It will definitely cause a problem, so I'm just breaking the plastic free of the fabric. Now let's see if we can get this to pop off. I'm not gonna lie, this one's actually really tight. It's probably really good. Almost. These fingers are under a lot of tension. A lot of these, when you push them, they're so old they don't have any resistance. So I'm actually really surprised. Means this one is probably kept in climate control. I have the screwdriver holding the finger out of the way for me, so I can try and get this side to pop up or separate. This might take some time actually, just because it does not want to move. I'm just looking to make sure I'm not missing anything. I mean, all these carousels from Mr. Christmas are pretty much uniform. Unscrew the screw and pop the fingers on the bottom. I can get the fingers to move. Again, they're not breaking. My screwdriver is literally just slipping off the finger because the fingers are rounded. So they, when you clip them in, they pop in. Not sure why. If I wedge it with a screwdriver, because of the shape of the finger, it's actually pulling the canopy tighter. I can feel it when I use the spudger. I'm going to figure out a way to pop these 4 fingers without locking them in. This carousel is in a really good shape. It looks like it was well maintained as far as it wasn't put somewhere where it was abused or got hot and cold. There is nothing really brittle on it. Everything has good flex. So, now the only thing it is the foot fell off, and it probably fell off in shipping. It's right here. It's right there. You can see it's missing right there. I don't know if it broke or if it, yeah, it looks like the plastic's broke inside. So I'll put this back on when I'm done, but other than that, this thing's in really good shape. Put the foot over there so I don't forget. Bear with me while I figure out how I'm going to pop this canopy before it takes 4 hours to do so. And once we get the canopy off, I'll tell you if I had to wedge it or not, because definitely fighting me. And we'll go from there. And then we'll see what's going on down below. I'll be back in a moment. Alright, that was about 30 seconds when I saw the trick. Take a thin blade screwdriver if you have one, or a spudger. This one is slightly too wide. They do come in different thicknesses. The finger, and I'll show it to you once I pop it out, push it down all the way so it's outside of the hole. Kind of wedge the screwdriver in and then push up and it pops free. And it's not just the fabric, it's the entire fascia. So you don't have to separate the fabric glue from the piece. Of course, this last one's going to be a lot harder because there's no tension on it. But there's enough tension that it's going to stick. Give me 1 second. We'll get this last one off. I'll show you the fingers. There we go. All right. So, here's your holes. Here's the fingers. So, when you put the finger on, you push it down, and you can see how I'm talking about it rounded, and then push up, and it separates the whole roof line. So, alright, standard Mr. Christmas and anything that rotates from a Ferris wheel to a carousel that has lights on the rotating mass. You have your rotor. And all the rotor is 2 pieces of metal that have 2 contacts that when it spins, the contacts conduct electricity from the base to the top. The ring then has the wires that go out to your lights on the outside edge or around your wheel on a Ferris wheel. So, the inner one is hot, the outer one is not, or negative. Actually, it's AC, so technically wouldn't matter, but most likely what they did is on the bottom down here is a rectifier that make the AC DC and negative and positive accordingly. There is no way to remove this entire assembly without taking these wires off. So don't fight it. Don't break the bracket that holds it. Just know, either remember outer black, inner red, and I'm talking the rings, or take a picture or write it down on a piece of paper. But unfortunately, there is no way to disassemble this without taking the wires off. And it's not a big deal if you have a soldering iron. If you don't have a soldering iron, it can cause you a little bit of a hassle. So there's a nut right here that has a good fair amount of glue on it that we have to get the glue off to get this nut. Once we get the nut off, the whole thing will lift up once we desolder the wires. So I just turned on the soldering iron. So while that's doing its startup, I'm going to start scraping off all this glue that's in my way, because the glue will not allow me to turn the nut. Now when you put this back together, a dab of hot glue works. You can even use a dab of super glue. Super glue doesn't bond to metal very well, but make sure the nut is on before you do it. Do not get the super glue in the threads and then tighten it down, because it will actually bond at that point. And you will have a hell of a time if you ever have to take it back apart. I don't know what kind of glue this is. It's very rubbery. It's not hot glue. It's almost like a silicone glue or something. But yes, you do have to remove it. Don't try and get past that part. I'm just using a small blade screwdriver and a pair of Using those pliers as you saw to try and peel it up. Some of these have hard glue, like a resin or super glue base glue. Some of these I've come across have had hot glue, and I've come across some that had no glue and it had a lock washer. So depending on the model will depend on what you see. So let's get these wires removed. The easiest way to remove wires that are soldered on is to add fresh solder. Because what that does is it allows the heat transfer into the old solder, and then you can pull the wires off. Sounds funny, but it works. You can also use flux. Sometimes the flux will permit the transfer, not always. Just like that. Quick, easy, out of the way. Use a set of needle nose pliers and see if I can get this nut to turn. There we go. Now, if these have glue, I use hot glue to hold them. All it does is, as this rotates, there's a chance that the rotation may cause the nut to back off, which means that you lose your spring tension on your rotor, as well as you lose the tension on the entire unit, and the drum assembly can lift, or you could experience your lights flickering. Pushing the wires inside the center shaft, and that's so I can get the nut off. I'm not going to lie, sometimes getting these back out is a treat, but if you don't, you risk shaving the wires on the nut, because the nut's got threads and it acts like a knife. There's your rotor. Your rotor has 2 springs. Make sure you don't lose those. That's what keeps the tension on the disc. Now all that's removed, this whole drum will now lift off, exposing your center. That is some liquidy lubrication. Most of these are lubricated with a thicker grease. This is almost like WD-40 or something. There's no smell, but it's really thin and runny. This washer, don't lose it. If you do, get a replacement. Is what stops the drum from setting too far in, putting too much pressure on the lift mechanism, as well as the gearbox, which you can see at some point. Maybe you can. There's a wear mark right here where the bottom of this gear right there has rubbed this gearbox. So I wonder if somebody tried to take this apart, which might explain the type of glue holding the nut, and they forgot to put the washer in. It started rubbing, and then they took it apart, put the washer back on. Everybody makes mistakes. It happens. So if you take it apart and you screw up, just take it apart again and fix your mistake. All right. Heck, if you watch my videos, you'll see where I forget to do things too, because I get too involved and I miss stuff. All right. So let's turn the volume off. I'm not fighting Mr. Christmas here. The motor is turning perfectly. The pulley's turning. The gear is broke. So let me show you. I'll bring it up to the camera. Here we go. See that pulley? I'm going to turn it off. The pulley will stop. Click, like so. Hopefully you saw it turning. I'll do my standard so you can see it. We're going to put a mark on the pulley. Like so. Just so you can see. There you go. And if you notice, that gear and that gear are not meshing, and there's some material there. So either the top of the gear broke off, or there was a spacer that snapped. Spacer bushing. So now if you notice, there's nothing on the top here, and then this black is a spacer bushing for the top in this plastic. There's nothing here, which means the only way to get to this gearbox are the screws on the bottom, which means you got to remove, what, 5 screws to remove the base. So that's too big of a screwdriver. Oh, right there. I literally have probably close to 30 different screwdrivers to my left in different lengths and tip shapes. And then above me to the right, I have a kit with different tips for torques and squares and, oh yes, because nothing is uniform. And sometimes I forget where I put my tools, or they're buried. I need the screwdriver I used 3 videos ago, and it's on the bottom of my pile. I'm not really good at keeping things organized. That's why it's called Captain Chaos's Laboratory. I thrive when everything is a mess and when it's in chaos. I can find my stuff better when I have a pile of stuff than when it's all organized in a nice row. It's kind of funny, but that's kind of where my name came from, or the nickname. So here we go. And it's turned, and they have a really, really short wire. This one, so, which is stuck on this glue. It's the motor wire, and I'm going to say somebody took this apart because this glue is clear hot glue, and this glue, which is off to the side of it, is yellow resin glue. So this has been opened at some point by somebody, or the factory screwed up and they had to open it twice. Don't know. I don't think this was the original owner, mainly because I have the box and it looks like it was at a garage sale. So this wire is really, really short, so I'm going to remove the glue so I can pull some of this wire through. And we're going to, yeah, the yellow glue is that stretchy stuff, and the white glue is definitely just hot glue. And push the wire through. Now remember, this thing is greasy, so careful. Your hands will get slick, you'll drop stuff. Don't rub your eyes, you'll regret it. Pull that wire through, which allows me to tip it enough that I can see the screws that hold it together. This is your gearbox. You got 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 screws and a couple of pins. Plus you have the screw from the shaft. Belt doesn't look bad. It's a square belt. I replace them with the round ones in most cases. Seems okay. It's got good tension, good elasticity. It's not in alignment though, and that might be my problem. Also is, I bet you the spacer broke, because now if you look, you can see the shaft. See how this thing slides back and forth? I'm going to say that the spacer broke. Or it wasn't put back in when this was assembled. One of the two. Because with the pulley all the way down, my belt's in alignment, but my gear is not. With the pulley all the way up, my gear is in alignment, but my pulley's not. It would throw the belt. So, I'm going to say, like I said, I think it either broke, but I see no remnants. Usually when they break, you'll see remnants either on the top disc or down here. All I have in here is some foam. This right here is white foam from the packaging that came in probably around this lip. I don't have anything stuck to the bottom. I have my random gears on my bench. So anyway, so this one's unique in the fact that it's got a spacer problem. Well, let's fix it. So you got a couple of things you can do. You can disassemble the whole thing, which is what we're going to do. Or if you think you can fix it from the bottom, where you can put a spacer through the center hole, you can try that too. I'm not going to do that because it would be easier to apply the spacer from the top in most cases. I'm going to get it out and I'm going to check, because I just got my shipment of gears that I ordered a long time ago to fix a Limax piece, Octo Swing. And they finally just showed up. They were supposed to show up 2 weeks ago, but for some reason, the tracking ceased, and then it just arrived. So, probably got lost. Alright, so here is the 4 screws for the gearbox. And I'm going to try and carefully take the gearbox off. Oh, never mind, there's 5 screws. I didn't see it. There's a screw underneath this pulley, so you do have to take the pulley out, or at least this bracket to hold the pulley. So maybe you can fix this from the bottom. Let's find out. So, here's another pressed in bushing. This black plastic. It's probably an ABS pressed into nylon. Alright, let's take the belt off. And there we go. So, you could fix this without taking the whole gearbox apart. So, I am going to quickly reattach the gearbox so I do not lose my alignment. The other screw is right here. I did not see it because of the shaft on the pulley. And I'm going to see if we can fix it on this shaft. Once it's fixed, we'll check all the gears to make sure none of them are cracked. Like I said, but before I lose my alignment, you can actually check the gears right now if you want. All you gotta do is just take your thumb or finger and rotate them and look at each gear individually. So the first gear is fine. Second gear is good. 2 things. You'll either feel a jump when you're turning it, like there's something stuck in the teeth that's indicative of a crack, or you'll physically see looks like a hair stuck between the teeth, and if it's not a hair, it's a crack. So I'm just checking this big gear because it takes a long time to rotate. So all the gears are good. Mr. Christmas gears are usually really good at lasting, except on their carousels. Their carousels have a tendency of breaking the torque gear at the top. And I don't think it's that they break because they're cheap. I think they break because something stops the wheel that's not designed to stop the wheel, like a hand. It should stop on its own. Alright, so now let's check this little gear. This little gear is free spinning. It shouldn't free spin, which means that it might be cracked. I don't see any cracks, so I'm going to put on some magnifiers just to get a closer perspective. No, no cracks. Alright, so now I can see where the gear used to be. There's a indentation on the shaft. Not a knurl, which is weird. Usually they're knurled. So I want to make sure that's the correct setting. Make sure everything's aligned. It is. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go take this out and find a bushing that's the entire length from where I need it to be. So here is where the gear needs to be. I'll come up to the camera again. There's this line right here. You can see it. That should be about centered in the gear. That's actually what's supposed to hold the gear. It's a protrusion versus knurling. This long shaft I can put a bushing on. It'll prevent this from backing. So I'm going to go out to my bushing kit, which the majority of them are out in my outside shed, and see if I can find a bushing real fast, a long one. And if I find one that's too long, I can cut it, and if I got a couple of short ones, I can stack them. Now, you can also, if you had some spare, like ring gears, which is what rolled onto the screen from this bag over here, and you don't need them, they're smaller than this gear, so you could stack those and make bushings. You can make bushings pretty much out of anything. Now, my gear kit, which I have right here, I bought two. This one is just gears, because the same kit as the one that I have open over here. And then here's the primary. I can't pronounce it, but I'll show it to you again. Kuki or something. This one has bushings. That's what these, like this orange and pink and green. They're different diameter holes, or the colors. The pink has the biggest hole, but Mr. Christmas uses really large center shafts. So their shafts are bigger than standard, so you have to find something larger. Or you can use a drill and drill them out. But if you try and drill something this small out, you're probably going to break it into little pieces and spin it in your fingers. The reason I like the, again, whatever pronunciation you want to use, totally fine with me, is it also comes with a couple of belts, which aren't standard. You can see how large they are. But like this belt here, it's pretty much the same as that belt there. So it does come with some belts, and I link them below. It comes with some pulleys, which I've only ever had to use, I think, one. So I have a lot of pulleys. It comes with worm gears, ring gears. It comes with gears that you can put eccentrics on. That's why it's got these little holes right here. It comes with bar gears, which you screw down and it walks back and forth. You see the bar gears on stuff where the figure moves in and out, like the Vampire Castle that was just more recently put up. There's a bar that the gear rolls back and forth. Also very common, especially in Limax. It's used on the mausoleum to move the mortician out of the front door, to move the casket out of the crematorium, and to move the drawer out of the mausoleum. So there's 3 sets in that one piece all by itself. So these are nice to have, and you can cut them to size. And then they have multiple holes for different ways to attach them. So, but these are not going to be big enough for this. So I'll stop my rambling real fast, and I'm going to go find something to fix this so I can get this one put back together and hopefully get it out this week. It's not going to get there before Christmas. Today is the 18th of December. There's no way in God's green earth this is going to make it back to its owner before Christmas. So, but I'm going to do my best to get it back to them before the new year. But it's up to the shipping companies. So I shall return in just a few moments. All right, I am back. It's been 6 minutes, so not too bad. All right, if you watched the ski lift one that I rebuilt, it's like an hour and a half long, where everything was shattered. I use stuff like this. This is a circuit board standoff, and I cut this to length. It was 1/8 of an inch too long. There we go, and there we go. It's a little smaller in the gear, which is perfect. So pop the gear off. Gonna clean the shaft. Drop that bad boy on. And then drop this on. Now, what I am going to do is I'm going to put a drop of super glue on this. The reason being is the stimple isn't holding the gear. The gear technically shouldn't be free spinning. So let's make sure this is in alignment. It is. Perfect. So what I want to do, and I don't do this often, I have talked about it on videos, but when your stimpling is bad, or your gear had, wait, is this gear cracked? Maybe I see the crack and I'm wiping all the grease off. there is a very small crack, but it's not all the way through. So, before it spreads, excuse me, I am going to use super glue. And we're gonna stop it before it gets too big, because Mr. Christmas uses odd size gears, as you saw with this big shaft, and we can stop the crack, which is nice. So I'm not going to. I'm going to put a little bit on the top because I don't want to glue the piece I just put on. So meantime, this wants to come down to the bottom. There we go. So I just put this around the edge so that way the gear pushes it on and it fills in. The crack's not in the teeth, it's on the back side where the stimpling is. That's why the gear is slipping. And it should go right there. And make sure you wipe it off the top so it doesn't glue itself into the spacer bushing. I know some people are like, why don't you just glue it on the shaft? It's because if you do that, it just curls it down and it doesn't get inside the gear. I'm just putting it back in to check the alignment to make sure I put the gear in the right space. So, now, it's not going to permanently bond to the metal. As much as they advertise super glues that holds metals together, I find it doesn't hold them very efficiently. You want to glue metal together permanently, use a soldering iron or a welder. But all this is going to do is fill in the crack and add a little more resistance to the gear to allow the gear to not slip on the shaft. So remember, before you put the crossbar on, put your belt on. Because you can't put the belt on, the crossbar's on. Don't need that around here anymore. Crossbar. Just wasn't lining up correctly. The shaft wobbles, so it wasn't lining up on the standoffs. Making sure everything's good before I just screw it in and break something. Here we go. Alright, so let's get this screwed in and then test it. Here we go. There's one. And let's get the other one in. Good. And let's on. Alright, so apparently the belt is slipping now that there's torque on it. Yeah, so it does need a belt. Feels okay, but it's stretched. Alright, that's why we test things before we reassemble them all. Sometimes belts feel great, but they're just too big, they're stretched. And once the torque was put on it, the belt was obviously too big. It just started to bow out. So it looks at the moment, it's just a sliding gear and a belt. Belts are very common, so. No, she's still binding. So, we do have another problem. We may have another broken gear, or this gear is actually broke more than it appears. All right. Might have to go order a gear. Trial and error. Oh yeah. Nope, it split open. Apparently the either the glue was too thick or it was fractured more than I could see with no pressure on it. But I'll see if I can show you, and then I'm gonna go see if I have a gear for Mr. Christmas, because again they use a different size. So it's right there. And I don't think it's gonna focus. There's a black spot right in there. That black spot is actually the silver, where the gear has actually split all the way. So, all right, bear with me for a little bit. I'm gonna go see if I can find a gear. I'll be back in a few. All right, I went through all my gears, and all my original or OEM gears from Mr. Christmas, my parts houses, were all cracked. So they don't work. So let's toss these things. But in this Awatukai bag was one gear, one that was the same diameter, but the hole in the middle was wrong. So if you see my previous videos, I used a hand drill and drilled out the center hole from 1 mil to 3. So where the switch is, it's a switch. Spins, spins. So now it's time for reassembly. I did leave that spacer in there, so if the gear starts to slip, it won't drop. If you remember, we shoved that wire down inside. Well, I'm going to give you a little tip. It is this wire right here, and it does not like to go back in. So if you can't feed it in this way to where you can see it inside the hole, which is what I'm trying to do right now. Oh, I can see it. Okay. If you can't do that, get a piece of scrap wire or string and pull the wire out, drop it through. If you use scrap wire, you can solder it and push it through, solder it, and pull it back up. Or with string, same thing. Feed the string through, tie it, pull it back up. Apparently my dog hears something. Sorry. She's He's really good at barking. Well, I guess all dogs are technically. So, all right. So line up the holes. They have insets, and then push it down on, so that way it's seated. And now let's drop in the screws. And then we'll drop the barrel on top. Drum, barrel, carousel, whatever you want to call it. The rotating part. Check all your lubrication while you're in here. This track is still plenty lubricated for this, the bottom that rides up and down. These gears have a ton of lube on it as well. Luckily there's no lubrication near the motor because that's a high point of failure, so we're good. And then whatever the shaft had, I had it on its side so long it's run to one side, so might have to put some stuff on it. We're going to find out once we reassemble. All right. Oh, one more check. Spins perfectly. All right, and I can see the wires through the hole. So now it's time to set this in. Go till it drops and fits. And now look, it doesn't rotate. Don't force it, you'll break the stuff you just put in, and look, it works. It works. We're not going to keep doing that because those wires are almost touching each other. All right, so now it's time to reassemble. So, come on. Need to get the pieces out and put it back together in reverse order. So, first things first is the rotor with the springs. The springs go over the fat ends. There's two. The springs are the same and they're unidirectional, means you can put them on either way. And then drop this bad boy on until it drops, because it's got a flat side that fits over the shaft. Because it doesn't turn, this turns. So you got to make sure you get it lined up. I'm going to hold it down while I get the nut so it doesn't shoot up. And let's get this nut started. It's one of those nuts that only has one thread, so it's good if you start it backwards until it drops and then turn it forward so you don't cross thread it. You don't have to torque this thing down to some ungodly torque. So you don't have to torque it down to, you know, like 30 pounds. Just good and tight. Fingers. What I'm doing is I'm moving these up, which relieves pressure on the nut, so I can push this down further so I can get more threads out of the nut. So there's a spring on both sides of these, one pushing up, one pushing down. The one pushing down is a slightly stronger spring. So if you pull up on them, you can push the white nylon down and expose another half a thread to a thread, and then you can take your fingers and torque it down more. That way you have good pressure, and then these will ride up and down on this plate because this plate isn't perfectly smooth, and of course these wobble, and that's why it's got the springs, is to keep tension on it, and then it can ride the track. So that's good. Now we need to get the wire out. I'm going to use a pair of tweezers. Let's see if I can grab them. So this hole goes straight through. box. Tweezers got them up, and there we go. So again, if that doesn't work, get a piece of scrap wire, stick it all the way down the center, make sure it's long enough, solder these and pull it up. If you don't have any solder and you don't think twisting it would work because it may not fit in the hole, piece of fishing line, monofilament line, run it down, tie it around the wire down a half an inch or so below where they split, and then pull it up. Once you get it high enough, push it through, use a screwdriver, tweezers, needle nose pliers, your fingers, whatever, and you're good to go. So now you got to solder those back on. So soldering iron on. Now that we have this all attached, I want to make sure that it works with it's under tension, and make sure the lights still work. Probably helps if inner is hot, outer is not. Lights work. So there we go. And there's that. The solder. So I'm just gonna pretend. I know I added fresh solder earlier that allowed me to separate it, but I didn't let that solder soak in, so I'm adding a little more fresh solder, and then I'm getting this point hot enough to let it soak in. Now I'm going to tin these wires better than they are. There we go. You don't have to solder it while it's running. You can do it when it's off. I'm doing it while it's running to make sure that this thing actually runs continuously. So you can see the lights are on. And get that out of the way. Alright, so the next step is we're put some goop right there to stop this thing from backing off. Should have got this thing turned on. It takes a couple of minutes to warm up. Guess while it's warming up, we can entertain ourselves some music. Well, since it's Christmas time, let's go back to the Christmas carols. Okay, the button works. Never checked the music selection, so let's enjoy a little Christmas music while this thing warms up. We'll put a dab of glue, pop the top on, and she's good. battery's almost dead, so it might be one of the reasons why it's taking a little longer. So after this, I'm going to go plug it in and charge it. Hey, here we go. Yeah, it's good. Glue strings. So there we go. Just arc. When that cools, it'll stop the nut from backing off. Since this does not come with a jam nut, I'm going to turn this thing off because next step, that's it, is we're going to put this on. So, trying to get the fingers to line up. Same time you get the fingers to line up, you got to make sure the hole and the top lines up. The fingers moved, so put it back. It's a little fidgety. There we go. And then that should be lined up. It is. Now we just need these things to snap in. There we go. That's 2. 3. And 4. First one popped out. Yep. There we go. 4. Just making sure they're all good. And screw it on. Last but not least, we just I'm not going to put a lot on here. I'm just going to put a little dab on opposite sides. So it's very, very little. And that's just to ensure this doesn't just fall out. And the gun wasn't at full temperature, so because I turned it off as soon as it was warm before. And because this is broke and one of the mirrors fell off. Which mirror? This mirror right here. I'm going to use super glue for these, not the hot glue. So we'll do that here in a moment, but let's turn it back on. And let's, like I try to do, so you can see how they illuminate, let's turn off some lights. Get an idea. So, really don't see the glow much except right here. So we'll tip it. And there you go. Lights coming back. And volume going off. I'm going to turn that off and then push this in square. There we go. With it being a cold glue, it still has movements because the glue isn't as much to bond it but to wedge it. So there it is. There is the holiday around the carousel, Mr. Christmas, with a broken gear, a slipping belt once it was under tension, and then making a shaft to stop the gear from slipping down the shaft, and the new one's not cracked. So basically new gear, new belt, that's all it technically needed. Put a bushing shaft in there to stop the new gear. Technically it was for the old one, but the new gear from sliding down. You saw how you start here, you pop this guy off, work your way around the fingers, get the fingers. I found it was easy to push the finger in, wedge it with a small screwdriver, then pop the lip, and then do it on 3, and the 4th one just falls right out because there's no more tension on it, of course. When you put it back together, make sure the 4 fingers line up and that you get the center piece lined up, or else it won't go together. Once you get the barrel out, remember you got to desolder, shove the wires inside, take the nut off, pull off the rotor arm, make sure you don't lose the springs, lift this off, set it aside, and all your internals are down here. Once you get to those, you can look at the gears, belt, pulley, motor, electronics, solder joints, your switches, your plug-in port. If it's broken, you might be able to find some parts on Amazon. You can try Happy Holidays parts. I'll link them below. He carries parts to fix this, like the gears, the motor, the belt, etc. The belt I used, though, was from Skull Crane, so I'll link them below. And the gear came out of that Tukey, came from here. The one that I modified by drilling out the center, which I've showed in several other videos. So I'll link this gear kit below as well, since it had one and only one of the drive gears for the Mr. Christmas. So, all right, well, that concludes this one. We'll be back on the next one. Thanks for watching. No, I am going to glue these on, but I figured y'all know how to use glue. So I'm going to glue these on, let it sit, and put it in its box. So next one, we'll see you later.